All right. Welcome, everybody. Episode 12 of Just a Game podcast. I'd like to welcome our guest, Andy BowieEffect Wilson. Thank you for joining us, my friend. Finally, we're here.
Yeah, it feels a bit overdue, especially with scheduling issues. But yeah, we're here finally. At some point.
So, I know we got the series going on. You're playing. You gotten to the point where you're regularly playing the highest stakes in the game, competing. But I really want you to take us back and let the people know kind of how you first got into poker, what's ignited that passion for the game.
Yeah, it's an interesting story, I suppose, and I guess some people might have read about it in the past. I basically was a high-level video game player, primarily in a game called Trackmania. So when I was a teenager, I would used to just go around and play in various local area network events, LAN events. We would compete for like a pittance. Like the prize pools were not what esports is nowadays, or traditionally, where a lot of people now can make a pretty decent living playing the biggest games. Um, but back then, it was just purely about pride and prestige, as you might coin it. Um, and I just spent umpteen upon umpteen hours sacrificing social life, I guess, of a normal teen just to play this silly video game. But ultimately, I was like the best in the country. At 14, I won the UK title that we had on in the Electronic Sports League, which is still ESL still run tournaments now. For primarily for Counter Strike, but yeah. Then I moved and played on the world stage. Kind of packed it in when I was about 18. Went to university. And just so happened that one of the esports streamers I used to watch once hosted Jason Somerville, just around the time that I went into my freshman year at university, freshers year, as we call it in the UK. And we just so happened to have a poker society that I saw at the fair where you could sign up for various societies. And it was just through that, there's a real parallel in how one can approach poker and how one approached esports. Is like it's a very individualistic game. What I played in it was like a singular player format in a video game I competed in, but also just the way that you can really grind, and it's quite meritocratic in that respect. Of course, there was variance in the video game too. It's obviously a deterministic game, but whoever shows up on the day and just performs well under a certain set of conditions is going to reap the rewards. So obviously, poker there's a different element to it that's kind of unique, but at the same time, the skills required very much translated pretty well. And it was just through that really. Started playing student free rolls, free rolled into a tournament at my local Grosvenor, which is a UK casino chain. Ended up chopping that tournament like £100 buy-in during my summer break from first year to second year for £10,000. So then I had a bankroll to play with. Signed up to play online. Played a semester at second year, bunking lectures, and then I binged to Micro Millions actually back in the day, like
Nice.
2016, and then I dropped out of college. Start of 2017. So it's been 8.5 years of just like steady progress. And yeah, that was really how I kind of got my first grounding in the game.
I'm curious really quickly. You mentioned that when you were playing esports that it was umpteen hours, like a lot of hours that you had committed to it, right? When you were getting into poker, like how obsessed with the game were you? Like how many hours do you feel like you were putting in per week?
I mean,
how much do you study? And then you can kind of transition even into like how much you're doing that now.
I think the difficulty back then, and I think this has really changed in the current game, and I guess we'll get onto that at a later point. It was a lot harder to study back in 2017. Like Pio was in its infancy, and I'd actually heard of it just through through discourse in Twitch chats or what have you, or first getting into Discord and talking to like-minded players. But you need very strong hardware to be able to actually run, simulations, and all, at the same time, you wouldn't really know what you were looking for when you're like very much a beginner in that space.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the studying was just largely watching pros do what they do and explain what they were doing, which I would spend a lot of time doing. And obviously, it's passive, and maybe it's not like kind of targeted study per se, but it's just picking up things and just like on a fundamental basis. Quite a lot of hours, but I would say not in a particularly targeted way. Whilst I was still on the back end of studying, basically, yeah.
Okay.
I think that's the way.
I mean, yeah. How much were you playing? Were you playing like just a couple nights a week at that time, or?
Yeah, I would say like most Sundays, and then just one or two other days during the week when I wasn't out drinking with my friends or what have you.
Sure.
We actually had a house in second year. I remember with three of the people I knew from student halls that everyone would live in the student accommodation in first year when you get to know people that you'd never met before, like dorms. we got a house in second year, and pretty much everyone in our house just kind of picked up poker at the society. So we were all just like be on our laptops playing $2.20 hyper turbos on Poker Stars and such. kind
Oh,
of all just
nice.
like railing each other, yeah. So we would
Yeah,
do
it
that
sounds like
quite a
fun
few
though.
evenings, yeah. And that was kind of how we all got our grounding, I think. And then I kind of took it to another level and decided it's something I want to try and pursue, you know.
Yeah, sure.
What did you what was like kind of your roadmap to your success in poker? Because I think everybody's journey is quite different, and for some it's starts off easy and maybe isn't as challenging if they don't face a huge downswing. Some people might, let's say, do all the right things where they might not get phased by it. Did you kind of have any big road bumps in your path to where you are now?
Yeah, it was a pretty interesting trajectory after I went full time. So I remember this was documented on the PokerStars blog. Obviously, Lex has worked with BBZ for years now, and I remember once he won the Thursday Thrill. I want to say like November 2017 when it was still like 70 odd thousand up top. Still not quite the full heyday, but it was still pretty damn good for like random non-series Thursdays or what have you. And I remember satelliting into it as like at this point I was a full-time player, maybe playing 20, 30 ABI. I don't exactly remember. It was quite a long time ago now. I got into it for a $55 satellite. I ended up winning the entire tournament going into my 22nd birthday. It was like the night before my 22nd birthday for like $78,000, which kind of like took my bankroll from 20 something K to six figures. But then actually after that, I kind of maybe pushed myself a bit too much without putting in the adequate level of study to kind of like hang at those stakes, if that makes sense. So there was definitely a period in 2018 where I would just go and play a lot of live tournaments with my newfound riches as a 22-year-old. But I was, like, and I wasn't doing like terribly per se, but I was definitely not clearly winning at those stakes. And there was definitely a period in 2018, 2019 of stagnation. And I think it was actually the lockdown, I think, that kind of changed everything there. I think lockdown was a pivotal point in my kind of like career as a poker player, to be honest, which is because it's kind of unique in terms of how online poker really changed for the better for a time period just because of like the nature of things at that period of time.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
2020 was a big year for you. A big year in terms of like how much you grinded, big year for you in terms of like how seriously you took the game, big year for you in terms of scores. Like what are you talking about specifically?
All of the above, basically. So I remember vividly, Hossein Ensan won the WSU main event in 2019.
Mhm.
And he was advertising a product, DTO Poker. And DTO Poker was just about the first on the market of like a kind of further taking of, IO's outputs and putting it into a gamified format. Nowadays we're all used to like, I mean, we had Odin for a while. Now we're all used to GTO Wizard and everything that offers.
Mhm.
But DTO was kind of the first one that probably gamified it and offered it as like a simplified product where you could very easily learn heuristics. You would just drill against a robot and like and then I just made more mistakes. So it was basically a year where I just did infinite chip EV, SRP versus big blind grinding,
Yeah.
cold pots, everything else, and just learned like all the true heuristics of the game.
Mhm.
And then actually knew what I was looking for in a biosim when I went ahead and actually ran one.
Okay.
That also coupled with the fact that online was basically a Sunday every day. I started to push myself up in stakes. I was backed for a while. I was playing higher ABI, and then had a runner up running a bracelet online events. Like it was basically just the make or break year that kind of. I think if I didn't have success in 2020, I would have likely gone back to university as like a mid-20s guy and gone and done something with a bit of money. So I think it was that pivotal, I would say, as a
Oh
year,
yeah, it was a
to be
huge year
honest.
for you then. Like that definitely made
Mhm.
made a big difference. If it was like, if this year doesn't work out, then I'm going to transition to doing something else. That's a
That was exactly it, because there were 2 years where I'd just been break even basically. I was winning at like the lower stakes in 2018, 2019, but whenever I shot took, I just wasn't having much success. And of
sure.
course, there was going to be variance in that, and like there were a smaller sample size of my overall volume, but I definitely didn't have the skill set required to make full use of taking those shots, right? And
Sure.
then yeah,
Yeah. I mean, if
so
you'd sun run,
that's
then you
that's
probably would have still been okay. But yeah, I mean, like,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
yeah,
I do think that thrill win, in a sense, it set me up, but in a sense, it set me back. There was a give and a take there that I think probably doesn't get recognized enough by when someone has a score. I think you see it over and over again. If someone just has that positive variance for a while, they go up to the high stakes immediately,
sure.
and sometimes that can break them. As opposed to just grinding it out and just kind of doing it organically, you might say.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's part of the variance of the game and
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
how
Yeah, you get
distribution
the money.
works.
Yeah, exactly. You just climb. So it's, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
How much do you feel like you played in 2020? Because I think 2020, that was the year for me personally where I played a lot. Actually, I played a lot and streamed a lot during 2020 because there was nothing else to do. But like how much, how many days a week do you know? Do you remember? Like were you playing every day?
Oh, I think 5 or 6 days a week,
Yeah,
but like at least 40 weeks of the year, probably more.
yeah,
It was the only year that I definitely cleared 5 figures in, like, like game count, basically. That was like the one year I did it. 2021 was probably pretty close too, because of the first half of that still being the same.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how it
2020
was
was
for me
definitely
too.
the year. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, nice.
It was
Yeah.
just so crazy. Like this time 5 years ago, every single day, even before Scoop, it was absolute carnage. Like every day, like there was 1,000 players in the bounty build of 530, for example. It was just
Yeah, the
the
staking
the,
side of
the
my business of what I do was also like wild in 2020. There was just like, yeah, everything was huge and everyone was
it
asking to
was
like 10x their ABI. Like all the guys that played like $50 ABIs wanted to play like $500 ABIs because the games were so good. So like it was just everybody was like redlining it. It was a lot of fun too. I mean, like it was a very special year for poker in that regard because yeah, everybody played bigger. Do you remember what you were playing ABI wise before COVID and then after, or like during? Do you remember like how big of a
yeah. So
jump you made?
I think on my own dime, I was playing like 80 ABI late 2019 or something, 70, 68, somewhere in that region.
Hmm.
When I then started getting backed by a good friend of mine, who was also a high stakes professional,
Hmm.
um, I probably immediately started playing about twice that, and then I just slowly during 2020 initially had a pretty big downswing amidst all these huge games and adding bigger games into my repertoire on a daily basis. When I got out of that hole, I would say I was playing about 200, and then I've just kind of slowly kind of gone up from already around 200, so not small at
No,
all.
that's not small. Yeah.
Uh, I was doing that by the end of 2020, I'd say, and then suddenly, like, I've kind of slowly crept up to where I am now, which is like 400, 500 ish, depending on what side of bed I wake up on in the
Yeah, yeah,
morning or what have you,
yeah.
or what's doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, $400 or $500 ABI. That's I'm trying to think. I think I was. I think at one point, I wasn't playing a lot of tables because it's harder to play a lot of tables when you're streaming. How many tables are you playing now?
Max 12 on a Sunday, but weekdays, even during Scoop, I'll probably play like 8 or 9 maximum
Yeah,
because
okay.
I think quite deeply about situations that I'm in,
Yeah, so me and you
and
are
I like
pretty
to configure
comparable
it.
in terms of what we play when I'm not streaming, and then if I am when I was streaming, then I would play like 7 as a cap because like it's just too it was just too much to like communicate with people and try to like not lose my mind. So, but yeah, without
Yeah.
streaming, I would have played like 12. And yeah, if you're playing 7, then the ABI creeps up. So I think that like for a large part of the time period, I was playing like a 11, like a $900 to $1,100 ABI, I think, which I think is just the result of yeah, just having like so few tables. So yeah, so if I was playing like 12 tables, like you're playing pretty much everything that's big. If you're playing like a $400 or $500 ABI, right? Like that's most of the big stuff that runs. And
Yeah,
there's
because
also
they
more
had
big
that
stuff running every
5K
night.
running
Yeah, every
when you were
week.
streaming. Party had that. Yeah, that had that 5K running every. That was a pretty good 5K.
Yeah. So yeah, like 2020 just saw a massive spike in the buy-in range too, right? Like relative to what we were all used to,
Mhm.
like just how often high stakes games were running. Um, but how often are you playing now? Because obviously like the games are much smaller now. Like not I say smaller, like
Uh,
the sorry, the games are like not running at high stakes as regularly as they were then, I would say.
yeah, it's very series and Sunday centric now. I mean, it always has been to an extent, but like certainly is nowadays for higher stuff, I would say.
Hmm.
Um, I'd say, I mean, during a series, I like to play 5 days a week, maybe even 6 on the days that I'm truly grinding a lot. Um, Outside of a series, often maybe just like 3 days a week, and then just doing like coaching, studying.
Okay.
Obviously, I've got CFP obligations as well as doing BBZ stuff, so
How
I've
do you
got
run your
plenty of stuff
CFP?
to
What's your
preoccupy
CFP
with.
look like?
I think I've got 7 students under me that
Hmm.
I get a share of their profit, and I basically do one-to-ones with them on like a rota basis, and then we do like group webinars too. So
Okay.
it's basically like multiple times a week I'll be doing either one-to-ones with various people or group seminar on a various topic or what have you, and then they
Yeah.
just have
Nice.
different profit goals, and like initially I'll get a bigger cut, and then obviously as I do better and better, I take less and less, etc.
Yeah. Nice.
It's kind of the traditional model, yeah.
How often are you coaching each guy roughly, or does it vary from guy to guy depending on like how you break the deal down.
There's a lot of just like if whenever they just message me on Discord, we'll talk about a hand as much as they want to. I would say certainly a few hours every fortnight for sure, just
Yeah.
like dedicated. And then like there's some group stuff as well that we'll all kind of come and bring some hands and talk about a particular topic that we all want to like have more of a deep dive into, you know.
No, nice. Okay. Sounds interesting. Good.
How do you feel about the series running right now? Because I know you guys were talking a little bit before about the climate of high stakes. I mean, when I saw it, GG announced their 250 mil guaranteed series. I thought that was pretty sick. I don't think anything's come close to that online in a while. I've
Yeah,
been out of
GG's
touch
just
though.
GG's just kind of cornered the market at this point. Stars, as much as Scoop is their flagship brand and has been for God knows how long.
Yeah.
It's the slowest that Stars has ever been.
Mhm.
They're running basically 1Ks at the equivalent of like a GG random Tuesday out of series, and that's like the most they can muster for their series now. But that's unfortunately just how the land lays now.
Yeah.
I still love Stars to bits, and they run better structures, and like there's more of a competitive feel about it that means something to people when you go deep in a Scoop tournament, let's say, that I don't think GG's captured yet outside of their bracelets events. But GG's traffic is just incomparable, really, and that's just
Hmm.
how it is largely.
Yeah. When you started
Did it make
GG,
you want to grind more? Oh,
good.
sorry,
No, no,
Jordan.
no.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go for it.
I was just gonna say, like, because when you were talking about, motivation for grinding, like, did that really increase it when they announced a series that big versus how big Scoop is now?
I've always just enjoyed grinding Scoop because I still like the allure of grinding for something that's prestigious, something that's like something that's maybe tangible in some sense. Because ultimately in poker, I think a lot of people forget this. Obviously, you can always hunt EV in every single way, shape, or form that you want. But the reason like the World Series of Poker is as big as it is because people want to win a bracelet. Like
Yep.
the reason that they can pull 10,000 players for a 10,000 buy-in tournament is because people want to win the World Championship bracelet. You can obviously say it's all a gimmick, but you could say anything about that for anything in life, right? You need like attaching meaning to something is important, and I think it's important for like I take these kind of scoops and W coops as like little championship periods where I'll put a lot of time in, put a lot of study in, put a lot of grind in, and you like it's something that's kind of like you're giving yourself a bit of purpose in a sense, and it's something that people like to be attached to and follow along with and give something that they enjoy. I think it's like it's important not to be too nihilistic when you approach poker tournaments just because they're all basically the same thing at their crux. Just presented in a different way, let's say.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to ask you. So, I mean, because you mentioned that you got started around 2017 with your like taking your career more seriously, um, and then the rise of GG is really like a late 2019, early like to me at least. Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe it was bigger before I found it. But to me, and like on the staking side, it really took over like during 2019, 2020, and then kind of displaced 2021. So how do you feel about the poker climate in like the post GG versus pre GG world?
Um, I think stars have just largely ran into regulatory issues more than anything else, and maybe just the rise of just not only being forced out of markets through like different laws changing in various jurisdictions, but also just like regulations and deposits and everything else have been such a massive game changer and not for the better in terms of poker ecology, let's say.
Sure.
And I think GG obviously when they came about and what the difference in the post GG versus pre GG world is that there's so many more like ways in which that you can kind of play on the site, let's say, and there's other things you can do, and without going too in depth, obviously you've got ACR that kind of is like another similar story in a weird,
Sure.
in a slightly different sense, but I think there's just kind of been a move to more decentralized poker, if you wanted to put it in that kind of way, as opposed to like the centralized systems. And Stars obviously, they are under a massive betting conglomerate. Their owners are the
Yeah.
biggest betting company in the UK, Flutter
Yep.
Entertainment. So they have to just be pretty stringent to the rules, and that's just how it is. And I think that's kind of been the story of, the changing world in which we've been in, pre-COVID and post-COVID. I would say largely, GG's rise kind of coincided very much with the pandemic.
Yeah, 100%. That's
Uh,
I mean, from my perspective, like 1-to-1 basically, between the rise and like kind of the transition over to it. Do you feel like it's more like the fields are definitely the biggest they've ever been, though, right? So do you feel like you're enjoying it more today, or do you feel like, um, I mean, it was more fragmented a little bit in like maybe 2019, but it was like you had the more of the prestige, I guess, that you were referring to, or like the events. Um, the events like kind of like you said had more purpose, I guess, with the W Coops and Scoops, because now that's sort of broken to some extent with the, but the fields are bigger, right? So like when it comes down to dollars and cents, the fields are just larger.
Yeah, oh for sure. I think I enjoy just having more deep runs from, I guess, just becoming a better player. Like ultimately, I feel less frustration. One, because my wallet maybe isn't hanging on the edge at points as maybe it once was, just from having some success as you'd expect. But also just being deep more and having more and more of those experiences as you improve more of the game. Like it's going to be a bit of like a positive cycle in a sense, you know.
Yeah. When was the last time you were staked?
Uh, it was 4.5 years ago.
Four and a half years ago. Okay, so you've been own diming for a long time, and then has it been like? Have you had like a pretty good cushion throughout the entire cycle, or in the last few years have there been any periods where you felt like you were close to being staked again?
No, I've never. I had a pretty big upswing after getting off stake online actually, and then
Been
did
solid.
very well live on the end of COVID. I think I had a slow 2023, let's say,
Sure.
but like I built enough of a cushion that I maybe lost, I don't know, maybe 20% of my roll or something. It wasn't
Yeah, nothing
anything
close.
nearly. Yeah, and then
Good for you, man.
2024 and beyond has been ridiculous. So yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people like they get into a good spot and then they manage like to fuck up being in a good spot. You know, like they reach too far, they take too many shots, things go bad, and they don't adjust too quickly. Do you find that you move down like a lot, or do you, or have you just like managed to crush at high stakes and you haven't had to make any bankroll or game selection adjustments?
I mean, I mean, I'm just like, I think I've just kind of become perpetually over and over roll for the stakes I play, and I still always piece out for the bigger tournaments, because not only are they bigger tournaments, but the edges are just so much lower and getting lower by the day.
Sure.
That is one thing, like the 1Ks, 2Ks, 5Ks, 10Ks. I don't really sell much for like the lower end of the high stakes, but certainly like when you get up to the higher tournaments, 5K and above, the edges are so minuscule. Like
Sure.
you're talking, if you're winning at 5%, you're one of the better players. You're one of the best potential best players in the tournament in like a small run of 5K. Like
Yeah, no,
so
I agree with that.
it's yeah, and I think so as a result, I kind of like to put a lot of my volume in those like really juicy 200s, 500s, 1Ks, the better 1Ks, of course.
Yeah, there's
And
still,
then just kind of
yeah. Go ahead.
and then just yeah, I've never really had the urge to go and play like the massive super high rollers. I have played a 50K in Vegas or 250Ks in Vegas last year, and I played quite a few 25Ks, but I don't really see the need to go and push myself out because I think, like you were alluding to, once you've kind of built up to a certain point, it hurts more and more to lose it. Like if you're a young guy that's always just like swinging with like you run up to a 50K, 100K roll, and you have no like pressures in life, and it makes sense to just carry on shot taking it to see where the fuck it gets you. But like once you're at a certain point where you're a bit later in life and you have a bit more responsibility and you build up to a certain point, like it starts to hurt more. Like
Yeah,
that,
sure.
that downside.
Yeah, I mean it's funny because that seems to be like a threshold for a lot of people. Like when I spoke to Elmerix, myself, I've spoken with other guys. Like the 250, 500, and to a lesser extent like the 1K range is like a super sweet spot for like juiciness, like good game quality, and like not too much financial risk. Like once you have a lot of dough. And then we all seem to play like or at least I seemed to play like so. There's still activity from the better players at the like 2K, 5K, 10K, 25K level, but there's something about it that's just like fundamentally more uncomfortable than like even if you have a lot of money, than like that like $500 ABI ish. And so
it's like it's almost a sweet spot. You can like kind of pick and choose your own battles as much as you want, and you're just really kind of just perpetually building at that point, and things are going well for you, and you continually maintain your edge through studying, keeping up with the modern trends or what have you. So
so you still sell you still sell like some action at least to like 5K, 10K, 25K, and to a lesser extent, and 50K obviously if you're selling those. That's how
and largely even in the softer 5Ks, 10Ks, like especially if I go and play the World Series, I probably won't sell for a World Series 5K, for example.
Yeah. Okay.
I might have a couple of like if I make it deep and there's another egg, I might swap or something. But like,
sure.
I like an online 5K is a very very different story. Just because.
Yeah, it's tougher.
Yeah,
by like a landslide.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, not even remotely close. Like,
no, yeah.
I mean, an online 5K is equivalent to a live 50. Like, obviously that's kind of a bit of a meme, but like some of the 5Ks I've played in the past few weeks, like especially on Stars, these rake refund 5Ks I've been running. it's basically a Triton. Like it's just
Sure.
there's not really a spot in the field. Like the only reason I'm even turning up to an extent is because they refund your rake, but then you've already got the rake back points, and they manually refund you.
Okay.
So you're basically getting paid to play the
Yeah,
tournament, which is
yeah.
actually pretty great. Yeah. So like as long as you're not if you're break even, you're winning.
Yeah,
So like
exactly.
I have a
You
reason
just
to turn
got
up.
yeah.
So it's not.
Expectation is running at 0, like you're doing fine.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just weird that like we all, not we all, but like there a large fraction of players settle into that like $500 ABI comfort zone. Anything higher is like maybe I'll still sell for it. But like there's a
Yeah.
lot of players that I think find themselves in that spot. I don't think it's like because they don't have the money to play bigger. I just think, like you said, the edges get really fucking small, man. Like the edges get really small, and it gets more uncomfortable.
I think it's just a self-awareness as you get like when you're on that journey to getting to that point in the first place. Like as you're watching the best players play in the world, it's like, oh, they must be making so much money playing all these high stakes tournaments. And then it's just like the more you know, you go for that Dunning Kruger like kind of in effect. Where it's like the more you know, you less know, like akin to when you're studying
Yep.
like Stolvers in depth. It's a very similar trajectory in how you learn about like how ROIs work and EV is truly generated in poker. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think you're just gambling at that point. I think a lot of the, top guys just aren't gamblers. So they really understand, like, this feels like I'm punting money. Like, it'd be quicker to just hit red on roulette. I don't know. So, yeah, it just
Yeah,
doesn't feel as
in
great.
poker, we don't know that we're the best player in the field either, right? Like, you never know. Like,
Right.
you
Yeah.
always have your own ego for like how good you think you are relative to like how good the other top 10 or 15 guys are. Then like some small fraction of the field's probably cheating, right? Like it doesn't matter
Absolutely.
when it was. It's always been the case that some small fraction of the field's cheating, and then you're running against, you don't know how good you are relative to like the other guys that are crushing, that are doing extremely well. And then you're like, well, this EV is like pretty low. Whereas when you play a 500 and there's like 700 people in that tournament, or you're just like, I'm fine. Like it doesn't matter. Like there's like I'm doing really well in this game, and psychologically it's just way more comfortable. So
It's also
You-
really interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. I'll let you finish. Go ahead. I'll say it after.
Just talking about like the thin edges between top regs. A lot of people don't actually sometimes put enough kind of thought into the idea that some of like the best regs in MTT poker. Obviously, you've got a bit more of a hybrid kind of. You've got someone like Barack Wizard, for example. I was only 17 on ACR, one of the best cash players in the world, playing a lot of MTTs now. And I think a lot of people don't realize that like there are so many different aspects to a tournament because of how fluid it is, as opposed to like the staticness of like 100 BB cash.
yep.
That there are going to be top players that are better at different aspects of the game, where they'll have an edge in different areas of this game.
Yep.
And like depending on the structure of a tournament, depending on the distribution that they've been dealt over X amount of hands, it can look like one guy's absolutely crushing because like they've played 100 BB button against big blind against each other for like 50 hands,
Yep.
and then maybe like they've only played one orbit against each other in an ICM scenario where the more savvy tournament long time player is a bit more sharp than a cash like a hybrid player, or someone that's like very well versed in the deep stack aspects of the game. There's the different areas where like people will have edges over one another,
Yep.
and often that can kind of like people will kind of miss that in kind of the narrative of a tournament just because it's one tournament from beginning to end when you're watching it on stream, or another tournament from beginning to end, etc.
Yeah, I actually found that
I think-
throughout my whole career. And I agree completely. Like people would bring me, because I've always had a big network just because of the staking side of like what I've done throughout my poker career, and people would bring me like hands like, oh, like this guy did this or this guy did that, and I'm like, that doesn't make it good. Like just because he did it, like maybe first of all he could have had reasons for it, but if it's like definitively bad, he can have an extraordinarily high win rate and be really bad over here at this part of the game, and still simultaneously be like really good at this other part of the game over here, right? So yeah, I think that's I agree a lot that like a lot of the top pros that don't necessarily have like their edge isn't static across the entire tournament, right? Like they might have a big edge at these different fractions of the tournament, and then like a much smaller edge will be making substantial mistakes even at these other parts of the tournament.
I think that's an important realization, especially going into a season where like when you go to the World Series, for example, you might see a few more cash players in the mix. Or like certainly tries when you see someone like Linus play. Like there's going to be like if you see something like if you do something on an FT, for example, and someone runs it in HLC and they're like, wow, why has he done this?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yes, I think the other players at the FT might have made a bit of money off him making that mistake. But there are how many hands in day one will he have just been like hoovering up extra big blinds for 100 because he's Linus playing 100 big blinds deep, 150 big blinds deep.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's not static. It's very fluid, just because of the nature of what we do, what we play.
Yeah, 100% agree with that.
Did you find the way you approached studying the higher you climb change in a way? Not so much learning new stuff, because I've just talked to a couple other people, and I feel like this is more directed towards you who plays kind of near nosebleeds. Where have you done a lot of work to, reviewing hands you've played a lot against some of the regulars you'll play against?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing that a lot of players do at the stakes I play. They have like teams of people they'll do work with, and there's like sometimes there's a bit of like an ethical gray area potentially of like how much mass database analysis one could do or what have you.
Yeah, MDA or whatever it's
Yeah,
called. Yeah.
it's a bit of a taboo thing. Well, obviously it's like a bit of like an unspoken thing that I guess a lot of people are partaking in, and it's something that's going to be almost impossible to police. I've never really done that personally. I've always just focused on my own game and
Me
improving my
neither,
own
man.
areas.
It's not my style. It's not my approach.
Yeah, it's just not who I am. I just want to focus. Like I mark my own hands and I review my own game and just try and get a little bit better every single day in an area that I was maybe a little bit lacking in, or maybe an area that was once very good at, but now I've like kind of done an entire cycle of learning other things. I've actually got a little bit less sharp in this area again, and have to like refresh it again,
Yeah.
because there's so many new things and too many like this. The whole is just so like endlessly deep
Yep.
of like areas you need to like look at and like things that you need to be thinking about in different scenarios. And I think especially in the post-COVID era, this has just become even more so the case. Like as tools have gotten better. I just remember during 2020, not only do we have the DTO as like the first GTO trainer, we also then had Range Converter, which was the first kind of like dynamic GTO based charts, like with someone that didn't just have Monka Solver had run,
Yeah, exactly.
like. And it was the first time you going, oh wow, like it was actually kind of like the first kind of definitive step from just having like some idea of what ranges you can open, and like a lot of people are still just playing like Jennifer-esque pushfold from ICMizer
I remember
outputs.
that.
Like that was where we were 5 years ago, like 6 years ago even. It's crazy how far we've come.
Yeah.
And I think the next step after that was basically like as it became easier and easier to run risk premium adjusted stuff. So that's been the next avenue over the past 2 or 3 years. Adding in when people were using simple preflop initially to use to run like risk premium adjusted stuff, and then obviously HRC added that capability after it improved its own back end. How that really directly influences how we approach like playing in certain percentage of the field, like when we have a bubble factor of this, bubble factor of that.
Yeah.
What are we inducing? What are we trying to do? Like the click wars obviously come back with a vengeance as a result of all of this stuff.
Yeah.
That's kind of been there's been a real like kind of a real shift in how people study. It's a paradigm shift. There really has, in terms of like initially it was just learning proper chip EV and heuristics, and now there's just like an ever changing flow of like, okay, the charts now everyone is trying to work out nowadays are like people would think you're an alien 5 years ago. Like it was just so much more primitive, and like just having an initial edge, just having the range converter charts like in 2020, or just having studied them, like that would give you an edge up to like 1Ks. Like nowadays, like you'd be out of the door like in a 200 like late game if you weren't probably adjusting, because everyone knows those spots.
Yeah.
Like that's been the main shift, I would say, and I think that's kind of uniform all the way up to like basically the nosebleeds.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's also gotten
In
way
terms of,
easier to
like,
node lock your own assumptions into Sims. Like you could node lock your assumptions into Sims in using Pile before, but it would be naturally it would be like more tedious. Whereas today, like GTO Wizards incorporated ruse into their software, and we can you can very quickly node lock something if you actually if you're curious about something, and it doesn't take any energy from you at all. You just click some buttons and it just outputs instantly. So you can play around with like different assumptions. You can look at equity risk premium adjusted decisions. You can very quickly solve final table adjusted post flop strategies where we didn't have that capability before. Like there's just you can do so much more work that we all basically suck at everything. And then my approach has been like more to get better at the different parts of the game as opposed to like trying to like massively exploit using some MDA type of strategy. It's just like a personal preference too. It's not like a moral judgment necessarily either. It's more for me. It's just been like I would rather just get better at the game and understand more about the game. I find that more interesting than like learning how to like, everyone else is only using a button race percent of like 43.4%. So like this is what you should do as a counter strategy. I'm like, okay, like whatever.
Yeah.
You know, like I just don't find it interesting. Like I just thought like it's just not interesting.
Yeah, we're students of the game, right? And like the purity of the game almost is like that's what's kept us here for so long, I feel like, to an extent, you know.
Yeah.
I'd say just like kind of to platform from this, the next generation you've already touched on it with Roos and being incorporated as a GTO is AI. I know they're lining up Freeway. Freeway's been a big thing in the past year. Obviously, Prometheus has been a utilized software that a lot of people are using.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's Rocket Solver, which I think
I've
there's
heard
a
of, but I
couple of
haven't used
pros
it
that
as
don't
much.
focus that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard it's quite tedious. Obviously, Simple Freeway was historically very tedious to use, and
Yeah, I use
people
that
have
a
been looking
lot.
for like new solutions to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I use Simple Freeway a
I think
lot. Yeah, go ahead.
when GTO Wiz AI, obviously it's in that roadmap, and obviously they're moving slowly with roadmap because of what the technology we're dealing with is so novel, right?
Yeah.
But when the freeway comes out, that's going to be another shift, and a lot of people are going to like be playing very, very differently in a couple of years' time. I think what we're ultimately going to build up to, and I'm not sure. It's an interesting conversation to have because and I'm not sure how many people have had this conversation, but eventually there will be a point at which AI will be able to play a tournament against each other. Like robots will be able to like play their own toy game full tournament. Like you
Sure.
could simulate tournament on any structure you want. This will come at some point for sure. The technology will be there.
Yeah, sure.
Like if you think about how far we've come in the past 5 years, it's going to be there, and then we're going to truly find out how good the models we've been using to this point are. Like, and that's going to be a very, very interesting kind of like that's when the point at which we'll start to solve the game. Like, you'll never truly solve the game. That's kind of
Yeah,
like
sure.
the
That's the
beauty
nature
of
of
it.
this game.
But
Yeah. Yeah, the
that
models
will
keep
be
getting
that will
better.
be when we get some very, very good ideas of how the game should be played. As opposed to like the ICM is obviously the best answer we've had for the longest time.
Mhm.
But there might be some things aspects that we've not. Obviously we can run future game and like, change the outputs a lot. But I think when AI agents we're using the counterfactual regret algorithms and as obviously they can add in freeway capability when they're actually capable of running a toy game tournament. That's when shit hits the fan. Like that's the. I mean, I think that a lot of people haven't really talked about that. I think, but I think it's something worth thinking about.
Yeah, I do think that
Um,
that's going to come eventually for sure. As you pointed out, we didn't have anything, a few years ago, and like right, to the level of sophistication that we have now. Where today, again, we have Prometheus for three-way, which I still use. We have, we have an AI, we have AI capabilities with GTO Wizard. That's where I use the AI the most. Prometheus has like some like I think like the turn and river are solved using some sort of AI functionality. Whereas the flop is like purely CFR. But yeah, like I think in 5 years from now, like 5 years ago we didn't have any of that stuff, and so 5 years going forward, it's and GTO Wizard seems like they're investing like a lot of money, like GTO Wizard is trying to drive like and expand their functionality. It's not like they just have this business that they built and then they just like sit on it. Like they're putting a lot of money into new capabilities.
well, it feels like they have to, right? Because like if they did just sit on their hands,
Yeah.
then like someone else would come into the space and just usurp them, right? They've basically monopolized the space for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
Odin's been pushed out the door. Any other solution, like different ones from times gone by have been pushed out the door largely. But then at the same time, because the ease of access, the barrier to entry is getting lower and lower and lower perpetually.
Yeah.
Someone else could easily just sweep in and create a better mod, like create a very similar model to GTO Wiz, but do it better, right? So they're kind of forced to carry on innovating, as you say. So.
Yeah, but they're doing a good job of it. So like they're definitely, and it's not free to build those models. So
No. It's an incredible it's a company like unlike anything we've seen in poker, which is really astounding to an extent. Just like how centered like an entire like poker community is around like this one product
yeah.
of like studying the game. It's just like imagine telling someone 20 years ago about that. It'd be absolutely they'd be like, what?
Yeah.
Talking
Yeah.
about?
Yeah. We've all.
I just raced to find out where I was. Like that's crazy.
Yeah, they have like it's the first time that a tool has been like has almost as much notoriety as like the poker sites themselves. You know what I mean? Like I don't know, like GTO Wizard is just as synonymous with poker in 2025 as like GG Poker and PokerStars are like almost as synonymous as those brands, which is like never happened. Peel Solver was always like a niche thing for pros. And before that, like Card Runners EV was like even more niche for pros, and Monker Solver after those two was definitely more niche for pros. But GTO Wizard is like managed to figure out how to like democratize it almost, where it's like everyone has it, and or at least everyone's aware of it. Yeah, it's totally a new phenomenon in the game. But
yeah, because I even talked to friends who are just mildly interested in poker, or they just play home games, they play a little bit online, and they all got the app and they'll play it because I think you can even play it a bit for free. So yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah,
I
I'm
think
not
it's
trying to be
just
a
so
shill. I'm not
easy
trying to
to
be a shill
access.
for them, but like they're just like they just did such a
Yeah,
good
it's
like
just
they really did do such a good job.
it's
Um,
it's true.
yeah, and they're gonna get GT. I think they're gonna get three-way in. I think it's on their roadmap for like 6 months from now, maybe. Obviously, like saying that it's gonna be delivered 6 months from now and then delivering it 6 months from now are two different things. But
Yeah.
I believe it's like the ETA is imminent, and I'll be interesting to see like how much better it is, if at all, than Prometheus has been. Right? Like I'm always interested to see like how the solutions diverge. And like how much functionality they have, like is it going to be like fixed bet sizes, or is it going to be like is it going to be like almost like the ruse AI component of simple three-way, or sorry, of whatever I call it, simple three-way, because that's where I started with studying three-way pots. Man, that was tedious using that program. Did you how much did you screw around with that at all, or did you skip the simple three-way and go straight to Prometheus?
I messed around with simple freeway very briefly, but just found it very, very tedious to use, to say the least.
Yeah.
And I was actually really happy when HRC added multi-way capability, actually, because even in HRC, actually, if you do a long form simulation, you can actually do like multi-way risk premium sims in HRC. It has the capability to do it now.
Okay.
In HRC post op. I was very happy to do that. At the same time, you do really have to run it down to like a very low CI value and do everything to like like its truest extent, which is again very tedious, but it's at least there's the user interface for me. I found a bit easier to
Yeah,
use.
sure. How long are the sims taking you when you run those down? Like a final
Uh,
table. How much? Yeah, how much time does like a typical multi-way HRC sim take you to do final table?
it very much depends on what I'm running.
Like
Obviously,
let's say 30 to 40 big blinds with like 5 people.
No, I have a dedicated server that I rent with a friend. So, if I'm running to like a reasonable value, which is like 10, I would say.
Yep.
A couple of hours probably.
Yeah, okay, that's not
I'd
bad.
say maybe
That's
like,
not bad.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe it depends on the situation.
yeah, ceiling for running sims for me was like 20 hours. So like 2 hours is not bad.
Yeah, for sure. One thing to be said also, when we're going all the way back to GG versus Stars, like structurally, scoop tournaments are historically very, very much more deep stacked based. Obviously, there's been a shift in how operators run their tournaments online, whereby re-entries and them collecting rate, their bottom line is being attended to quite a lot more. That's got to be said. Obviously, GG have their admin fee. Obviously, ACR with GG-ified their structures, as people might put it, as akin to like the 6-hour late registers used to have for the longest time. But the average stacks are often pretty shallow in GG tournaments, quite deep. So that does mean it's actually easier to run those if you are studying them.
Yeah.
Well, akin to if you're running like a scoop main event FT, like if you're like obviously European won the 10K last year. I remember some of us running a couple of the sims of Hansi played. And obviously they're free-handed, they're playing like 80 big blinds average. It's like, what? Like, you really got to be able to like brain solve that stuff with just some ideas of like some overarching ideas of how you might approach this in a risk premium fashion versus how you might play it for chips. Like, it's like you've just really got to like, I call it brain solving. You just got to kind of like have a really educated intuition and just kind of work it out and play like some kind of systematic method that makes sense to you in terms of like this might align with the theory. And yeah, it's that's kind of like a beauty of poker in a sense though as well, like,
yeah, you have to fill in the blank spaces. I mean, like I would say brain solvings would be, if I were playing those, when I play those spots, it's generous. I would just say I'm screwing them up, but yeah, like there's still a lot of like fill in your best guess here. Like people like think that it's all solved and stuff. It's obviously not. But yeah, people have this expectation that that's the case.
I do use the term brain solver. I talk to my friends, but I usually use it in an ironic way. Usually, it's like when I'm describing a hand history, if I'm talking to someone about a hand I've played, whether it's live or online, whatever.
Yeah.
And just like sometimes I'm just astounded by like, and obviously there's an entirely different conversation to be had on reads and tells or what have you.
Sure.
Like just the speed at which people play sometimes in spots that I perceive to be very nuanced and hard to like work out exactly what to do. It just like kind of perplexes me at times. I'm like, how? I mean, I've not worked out what you're supposed to do at this point. Do you just already know what you're supposed to do? You just clicked a button. Obviously, they've usually just clicked a button. You've got to realize that, but like,
yeah,
it's just kind of a funny kind of irony ironic term I use. If I'm just playing against someone and they're just bet playing at the speed of light, I'm like, oh, hold your horses, buddy. This is like some check raise, pot turn to river. There's 2 SVR. Like then the board's completed a flush and brought a full house in, and you've just played it in about 3 seconds. I'm like, this, have you picked what sizings you're going to use, etc. I don't know. But like, me, that's just me being a bit of a nerd. But I put up like those are the nodes where I do take a lot of time. Obviously, if I'm just c-betting a flop, I'll just c-bet a flop.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, that's where the game takes a lot of thought. That's where it gets harder. And that's where the edges are, of course. Like most are, I think.
Yeah, for a long time I've been saying that I feel like I don't know if you've used GTO Wizards. Like they've got like almost like a database analysis component to their software now, and you can upload your database to it, and it'll like kind of tell you like which parts of the tree it thinks you're making more mistakes in or not. I don't know if you've messed with that at all, but I've had some students do that, and like no surprise, like people typically play the flop extremely well. Your pre-flops played pretty well. Usually when there are huge blunders pre-flop as a result of the output from that tool, it's like they folded kings or something pre-flop, like they misclicked or something, and it's just like they blundered that way. And then the flop is usually played extremely well, and then the river's played really poorly. And for a long time, I've basically articulated that most of the mistakes that people make are the result of like some kind of river mistake and then multi-way pots, right? Like multi-way pots and river mistakes is like where a lot of the edge still happens. And so yeah, when people like are playing those types of scenarios like very quickly, I'm also like, this is where everybody fucks this up, man. Like, you sure? Are you sure? Like, you want to go this quickly or make a decision that fast? Because yeah, like those 2 areas are still like the gold mines, I would say, for like your own study, trying to improve your relative edge to the field. And then I was going to ask you, like, do you feel like there's a different part of the tree, or would you just agree with it? It's like, multi-way. Like, obviously, like you could say ICM adjusted is the new frontier, which you mentioned, right? So I guess you probably refer to those 3 areas, or is there something else that maybe I'm missing?
I would refer to those 3. I also think like the Dark Forest nodes, check raise, how to play turns as the aggressor, as the imposition player facing check raise, like MDFing properly in those nodes, like actually realizing how, like making pod odds great again. That's like how I teach my students that all the time. I'm like, you're getting this price, you just have to call this amount of hands. Like this is just how it works. Like very similar to how you teach. I really resonated with how you approach those situations too, because it is just ultimately how it works. If you want a baseline, obviously you can move from that baseline. Don't get me wrong, but that is a baseline that you're supposed to know here, and that's how the means at which you're supposed to approach things.
Yeah.
I would say I had a newfound kind of appreciation for the levels at which river play goes when I was watching this Coin Pokeball Championship a few weeks ago, like a month or 2 ago.
Okay.
Like some of the hands, and obviously all the pros would go on with it was Kakiti on their YouTube channel, let's say, and like the amount, the in depth and just like the conversations between various like elite level cash strikes.
Yep.
Like some of these nodes that they would arrive to, it was just like really mind blowing. That like sometimes like those guys like. That's why I still think that they are the pinnacle of poker in terms of like theory, in terms of like approaching games and like really taking players apart.
Yep.
Just because, like you said, the detailed turn nodes, especially the river nodes, that's where, like you said, the gold. I think that is still a true gold mine. I mean, especially when you're playing deep stack, it has to be, right? Like the mistakes you make just get more and more amplified as the pot gets bigger and bigger, and the need for good execution becomes more and more paramount. So I think there is a newfound. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was only going to say that like it's also an area where like a lot of people allow themselves to just be like riddled with biases that don't really conform to like a high level of theoretical play. Like the probably one of the biggest cliches in No Limit Hold'em is like people don't bluff the river, or like people don't check raise the river, people don't raise the river light. Like all of these sorts of and then there's like the overlap of like people probably overvaluing their tournament life in a lot of different nodes. Like there's just a lot of ways to approach river strategy that lead to like very different conclusions, and it can be hard sometimes to know, especially like in cash games. It's all chips, right? So like there is no tournament life kind of considerations to be made, but people can sort of overdo those considerations early in tournaments and then maybe underdo those considerations late in tournaments. Like river strategy is just like very interesting, I think, and a source for like pretty big edge relative to. Yeah, like like the flop's pretty mundane. I would say like you have to get good at it if you're a newer player. So if you're listening to this, like you have to get good at the flop, but because it's the first part of the tree that everyone sees when they open up GTO Wizard and they look at a spot, like they get exposed to like so many flops so quickly that their flop strategy ends up actually being really good when when you look up like how much EV they're losing on flops, it's usually relatively low for most players who
Yeah,
actually study.
it's minuscule usually. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, and then it gets to be like really significant on the river. And then again, like I said, I feel like multi-way pots and then like risk adjusted scenarios too. So
Yeah, I was talking to a long-time UK pro who's mainly played cash, and he said he's kind of like got a new grown appreciation for like the modern tournament player just because of like how precise they are in how they approach some of these late game scenarios. And I said, yes, that's true. And I think I think the cash players once upon a time used to like really look down upon tournament players, and I think for one, the best tournament players have gotten a lot better post flop. I mean, just the tools and access, and obviously the amount of time they've invested into it. That's just going to happen.
yeah,
But secondly, yeah, like you said, there's this frontier that's been added to the game. Well, not really added to the game; it was always there, but like there's been more thoroughly explored, at least to some degree. That's kind of given these guys an extra edge over their opponents for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, like you said, I think there's probably a three-pronged kind of thing, like multi-way, ICM adjusted, and yeah, the really kind of like intrinsic rig of nodes. I would also add playing in there's like obviously like I was talking about check raise nodes and like leading and all that kind of stuff, but they're all basically ways to bloat the pot in kind of like more more like kind of hazy nodes, or like ambiguous, like what you're supposed to do. Like that's kind of obviously just being able to make edge in those situations is pretty big. I would also add to that free bet pots for sure.
Yeah, me too. I think
Absolutely,
that
like
would be like a follow up that I would add. Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, those pots
Obviously, the
get big
ranges get
quickly.
tighter and tighter, but like there's a lot of nuanced execution, especially when you're playing the more polar blind free bets, especially the big blind free bets of 50 or whatever. Like how you're supposed to play low boards versus some particular high card boards is like visually striking how wrong people get that stuff. For example,
Sure.
there's like a little maybe hint of your study, but like yeah, as opposed to when you're playing a more linear small blind free bet range of 100
100%.
against the mid open,
Yeah.
like there's just night and day how you approach those situations. But like yeah, the EV loss gets a lot bigger because the pot's just 4 times the size or whatever immediately,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, it's one of the first things that
yeah.
I when I'm teaching people three bet pots, it's like the big blind and the small blind aren't the same. Like they don't have the same range structures at all, and so the post flop interactions are going to be radically different, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, the fact that the big blind, yeah. I mean, we don't have to talk about like the compositional differences, but yeah, I would say that's people that, like your average maybe mid stakes or lower reg is like three betting, and then if they three bet from the big blind and the small blind, I think that they're out of position and they approach the flop strategy relatively similarly, and then subsequently approach the turn strategy relatively similarly, and that ends up being a pretty big blunder, like a massive blunder in that area. So I would agree, especially three betting out of position. Three betting in position, you have a linear three bet range. You can still use a high frequency c bet in a lot of scenarios, but three betting out of position, I think, is still like a pretty big source of edge today, for sure.
I think another one I would add would be value threshold. Just like what a good hand is at 20 bigs post flop and what a good hand is 100 bigs post flop are not the same thing.
No, not the same thing.
If you have pocket jacks on an ace high board at 20 bigs as a button against a big blind, you should probably be going broke yourself betting.
Yeah,
but
sure.
if you're 100 bigs deep, you doing anything except checking the turn, unless depending on the exact structure of the board, but you're going to end up playing bet check. Like they're just so inherently different how you would approach those situations,
Yeah.
And again, it's not because of the range composition, but also just like what a good hand is at like 5 SPR and what a good hand is at 20 SPR are just like so vastly different. And I think often when I'm coaching students, they just miss value everywhere. Like the best players in the world are so good at just getting value for their hand, and that's like that's the biggest part of the game. Like whenever you bet on the river, even when you bet pot, someone's getting 2-1, you're supposed to get called most of the time.
Yeah, sure.
So like being able to like value bet appropriately, and and not just be like bluff heavy or just miss value and like let this guy check back and let him off the hook with like a very clear bluff catcher. That's where like a lot of people lose EV for sure as well.
Yeah.
Just be able to like build an appropriate pot for your hand's worth. Like it's just like that's such a key principle to the game that kind of really doesn't manifest itself well enough, I think, in a lot of people that I play against, and sometimes when I'm reviewing hands or whatever.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree with that, and I've had like really really good players like that I've coached for like 9 months, and then when I look at their like when I try to find at that point like where they might be losing a lot of money, I'll frequently go to like 100, how they're playing 70 big blinds to have 70 big blinds plus like EP on EP confrontations, and I'll look at some of those, like, or EPMP confrontations, and I'll just look at like how they massively overvalue like the relative hand strength of like top pair, for example, in those types of situations, because they're so used to playing with like 35 big blinds where that hand's like clearly worth stacks or something, and I'm just like, bro, this ace queen on a queen high board is like not worth what you think it's worth. Like you can't just like check raise the flop and then like barrel it off on a draw completing turn or something and think that this is gonna work out great. Like you're dead. So like like just massively overestimating their hand values as they get deeper. They do underestimate their like what their hands are worth at shorter stacks too. You know, like I think a lot of people who are developing like might not check raise enough top pair or something when they have 25 bigs, but
Sure.
it's like a really expensive mistake to just like overvalue, like that happens a lot, overvalue their hand strength when they're deeper. Like they think that they play similarly and they just don't.
Yeah, for sure. Like just being able to just to differentiate between those different things, that just comes through studying. That's just from iterative work, just starting to really build your own sense of strategy as a whole, as just through doing work. Is that's how you work that out and build a kind of game plan in your head for that,
Yeah, you have to put in lots of reps.
How you think exactly. It's all iterative, That's there's no way around that, for sure.
How many
you can be as talented as you want, but yeah.
Yeah. How much are you studying now? And now, how much have you studied throughout your career? Are you still studying as much as you've always studied? Did you used to study more?
I would say I did. I mean, like on DTO, for example, I've never played more than one hand at once. I see people like multi-tabling GTO Wizard when they're drilling and stuff, and I can kind of see. I can kind of see the point in terms of trying to replicate playing a session, but at the same time, when I'm like studying as a robot, I'm trying to learn something. I'm going to be like, I'm going to be drilling a specific area, like cut off open, button call. What am I doing on lots of the different boards they're going to throw at me, and then I'll look into like the different aggregate reports or whatever.
Yep.
But like, just for example, I had an old account, and then I got, because I was doing some like pseudo ambassadorial stuff for them for a while, doing some coaching. I got a free account for a while. I'm just a paying customer because I'm not done that for a while. I must have played. I think I've played 50,000 hands plus, like one tabling, just like one hand at once.
Yep.
Like I've definitely I've done at least 50,000 just in that, and that's before running like all this. Like nowadays, I mainly just run sims, but and I still do it from time to time when I feel like there's an area that I just blundered. It's like if there's a spot I blundered in an online tournament and it's really playing on my nerves. Then I'll go and drill that spot basically. That's kind of like how I'd approach it. I would go and do like 100 different, like, because obviously it'll be one particular board where I just made a mistake and like in reading the situation. But then I just wanted to go back and play that board generically 100 times. Like obviously I'll look at the sim and see that I fucked up, whatever. Sure. But like I'd rather go and then play that spot with different ranges, but like because obviously usually it'll end up just being from a certain hand within my range that I. Maybe I would have played other hands in my range fine in this spot. It was just a particular combo I didn't quite see the bigger picture with as part of my entire strategy sometimes. And usually I'll just go and drill that spot generically because that exact unique spot's not going to come up again. But it's important that I realize what's going on with regards to like the actual range versus range interaction. I would say.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, to answer your question, I still pretty much every day I'll run sims. I think there's like not a day that I don't at least run it with sim like for something. Whether it's like people post industries. So I'd say it's more passive than active nowadays, but it's still I'd say it's almost just
daily practice.
Being in Discord. It's barely just daily, like a couple of hours at least, just like looking at stuff.
Nice.
Just consuming content. Yeah, it's kind of an obsessive thing, right? I guess that's kind of a nature of how you get to this point.
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to make sure that I'm trying to capture some of like what makes you, like what makes you tick, like what makes you like kind of habitually yourself, right? So like if you run sims like on a daily, like if you're checking out how things work on a daily basis, that's what I do. So I'm pretty much I have students and I check things out on a pretty much daily basis. And I think you just have to like constantly look at the solutions, play with the models in your head, see what makes sense. And then I'll tell you what I do, and then you can tell me if you do it differently. So like if I like run a sim, I usually run like a cluster, or like I'll look at like a cluster of spots that are like very relatively similar, so to make sure that I don't draw like the wrong conclusions. Basically like I want to make sure that I'm not looking at like an overfit. I want to make sure that like what I'm seeing actually extrapolates out to boards that are similar to this, to boards that are similar to this board. And then I'll also like run tests for like stack depth to see like if my understanding of how this works at this stack depth is similar at different stack depths. I'm curious like if you do something similar, or how do you make sure that you're not learning the wrong lessons when you run sims? Because sometimes it's easy, like if you just look at one sim and you draw conclusions, you can say, oh, this happened for this reason. But if you think that, you have to go make sure that it's actually happening for that reason and not, for some other reason that you don't understand.
Mhm.
How do you
Yeah, so
like, what's your approach to dealing with that?
So I'd say it's twofold. Firstly, I'll just change the boards that I run hands with. Um, I usually do a lot of marked hands during a series just because I'm playing and they're just
Yeah, sure.
hands of peak curiosity, right? But then often when I'm doing it, I'll do a deep dive myself. Obviously, when I've done seminars with you guys, I've obviously taken a lot of time going through sims every node and changing different boards. That's kind of what I always do because obviously the board can run a different way and your hand's going to play very differently. So that's me trying to make sense of everything that's going on in a particular situation. I'll make sure that I look at all different hands there. But also, like you said, if I'm playing in especially if I'm drilling a spot, I will drill that spot at different stack depths, basically, and just kind of really glean how much differently one spot's playing from a theoretical kind of like that kind of idea. Like, for example, if we say the big blind 3-bet or whatever, if you're playing 100 bigs deep and you're playing a 7 high board at 100, you're going to do lots of checking and then some bigger betting or whatever. But if you're playing this polar strategy at 30, a lot of people don't know you're supposed to basically range bet all lower boards.
Yeah.
Range bet, and then actually your ace king ace queen is a multi-street value hand. It's not a bluff catcher at any point. Although again, it comes back to value thresholds. So this is a very niche kind of
Sure.
heuristic. But again, the way that these ideas play at different depths, even if they're the same positions, it's just very very different. And then like you said, if I'm playing a single raise spot on a certain board, I'll test Jack 9-10 at 30, test Jack 9-10 at 70 or whatever, and just see how different the turn approach is with regards to sizing because. Our top pair might be worth a geometric bet for all intents and purposes on a various plethora of cards.
Yeah.
On various boards. At a short depth, but then at a bigger depth, we might be playing more of a dampened medium size, for example, or we might just be playing a bigger overbet very infrequently. Like who knows,
Yeah, sure.
And then also identify that's very very important, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to establish some similarities, seeing if you do some things different in your kind of studying process to what I'm doing, see if I could take something away.
Sure.
But we're doing some similar things. By the
I would say the clustering. I don't find myself doing a cluster of very similar hands because I kind of just want to see hands as they come. I'm just very
yeah, sure,
impulsive, I suppose. Yeah, but I think I'm looking for similar patterns in a. I would say that the trail of thought's quite similar in what I'm trying to look for improvement.
Yeah.
But maybe the approach there is a little bit different.
Yeah, like if I run Jack, I'll give you an example. Like if I look at Jack 10-9, there's a very high probability that I look at Queen 10-9, Queen 9-8, Jack 9-8, right? I want to understand all of those boards, make sure that I'm not extrapolating something from the wrong way. If I think something's blocker related, I'll look, and I use that as almost like I'm heat mapping the area to make sure that I'm not.
I actually do that. I do that when I'm working on out of position c betting because it's been a big leak because I think this will happen with people as they get better. They'll have been c-betting too much out of position in single raise pots.
Sure.
And then as you get better, you'll stop c-betting in out of position in single raise pots. But then you can't not c-bet in the system.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
It
should be about 25%,
it goes to
not zero.
You go. I think you go from 60, maybe 70 or whatever, to 20, and then you suddenly work back up towards 40, 45. I think that's kind of a process that people will go through if you think about it in terms of a roadmap. And I've been working on that third point for a while myself, and I'm kind of getting there. And looking at basically, especially if you're open to the early position you're open and the later position someone calls,
Yeah, sure.
there's certain boards where you have an asymmetric straight or something like Queen 10-9, King 10-9, they make a huge difference on your frequency. Actually, it's really interesting. Or a paired card where you just have an asymmetric advantage having trips, for example, and all kind of stuff like that. That's something where the clustering I think makes a huge difference actually. That particular case study.
Nice.
In that specific example, have you ever experimented with randomizing every flop C bet out of position?
I generally use my RNG a lot. I like using my RNG.
Yeah. Because I've heard someone basically just say they don't really care what they have. They'll just randomize it every time, just to hit frequency.
I kind of have done that in the past, but the problem is that as I'm getting more precise in my study, their hands are just always want to do something. So
Sure.
you can't always just do that because then you'll just end up losing EV. If you just have if you're 30 bigs deep and you've opened ace 10 and the button's called or something and it's 10-7-4, how much checking is ace 10 gonna do?
Yeah, sure.
Very very little, if close to none. You're probably
sure.
just losing money immediately, not just betting big,
Yep.
for example. So there are gonna just be certain hands, but at the same time, I think what you're saying is right in terms of a hand like Queen Jack can go either way. I imagine there's gonna be suit base, there's gonna be whatever else, but things like that are important, I would say, and like it's probably better than doing nothing, like, or being purely one way or the other for sure, because then you will have major issues like strategically. But yeah, I think
Yeah, I think you
there's
definitely want to
some
have
merit.
biases towards like the heavier weighted strategies, falling into one line. I think you definitely want to make sure that you're capturing that with your strategy, as opposed to just like, because I like, I mean, it's an organized chaos if you're just like 50-50ing off every single hand to bet check, but it's just like that strategy sounds horrible. Like that's just bad, right? So, so like if you're supposed to play jacks on, to your point, on like 10-7-5 or something like that, that hand's probably not playing to check as often as pocket nines. You know what I mean? On 10-7-5.
Yeah.
So like if you're playing both of them to check at the same frequency, like that seems like a mistake, right? So
yeah, because like there's a very big there's a multitude of reasons why Jax wants to bet right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And then you're building the betting strategy around doing that. Actually, that's the reason.
Yeah, that's the reason why Queen Jack bets the way that it does. Yeah, exactly. Like so. Yeah, you want to make sure. Yeah, I totally think that. That just like almost chaotically, but in an organized way, where you're just like 50-50 check everything or something like that. That doesn't sound great.
I just couldn't, like, the way I am, I just wouldn't want to put my control in an RNG like that. Like I will in a lot of situations, just not that one specifically.
Yeah, like if you're playing as a smart guy and he figures out that you're capped and he fucking bets 7x pot on the river and he jams, like you're gonna have to use an RNG to like adequately defend the range. There's not really a choice to that.
No, there's no way around that. There's no way around that.
Yeah. But aside from that, like I think you want to, you need to recognize that you need to use an RNG sometimes, but I think you want to make sure that you're allowing the skill part of like what you understand to show as much as possible, and like I personally don't want to have my students over rely on an RNG while accepting that. Go ahead.
I think the most important spot to use an RNG is pre-flop for sure. Not even close. Not even remotely close. If you're not RNGing pre-flop, you will just have a bias, and your range will just like if you're the sort of games you play, your range will just be shaped in a particular way that we'll be able to just be taken advantage of. And I think it's like a lot of people that I coach have just like they just critically under free bet mid position against early position, let's say, or whatever. Sure. And it's just because they haven't RNG'd a queen jack suit, like, or queen like jack 10 suited free bet 50. They just like call. It's like, well, it's still free bets. Like it's like it has good reasons to knock out the hijack if you're the low jack and someone is open early, for example. Sure. It's really, really important, I think, pre-flop to RNG. Like, I think that was something I would, like, really hammer the point.
Stress?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think studying cash games briefly years ago really taught me how important that was. Because I think it's even more important in cash.
Well, cash plays 3-bet or fold in a lot of positions, right? So, are you referring to, like, it's the button small?
Well, it's just, there's more of the stuff that's just not full weight. So if you have a mixed
like
3-bet to fold,
like,
if you have like a mixed 3-bet to fold, yeah. Have you ever thought about going into studying cash, Andy? Like, do you ever feel at a certain point you're gonna kind of get tapped out with MTTs?
I've actually been asked this quite a few times from quite a large amount of people. I have played a little bit of live cash. I played a stream live cash game 18 months ago. It was in Malta. I played your viral stream cash game. That was pretty fun. I'm not gonna lie. I debated literally like learning some like well, to be fair, the cash game world championship on point was rake free. I don't know if every game was an ante. Obviously, if it's rake free ante, it's MTT ranges 100 BB.
Yeah, sure.
That's just what they are.
Yeah, it's easy.
but like if it was rate free, but not an ante, it's going to be slightly different, but it's it's not a conventional cash game strategy. So I debated actually just jumping in and just getting a bit of a lesson off the best and just kind of like, giving myself a few 10k buy-ins, just seeing how it goes. Just like it's no different than me playing blackjack at a casino, really.
Yeah, it sounds expensive.
But it's like, but it's something you can gain a lot out of, though, right? It's like like you will take something out of that. Even if I went ahead and did that as like an enthusiastic recreational in that particular little niche area, let's say. I think I'd have enjoyed it. I didn't end up doing it, but
sure.
That would have been something I would have probably enjoyed doing. But as like a long form thing, no. I just enjoy the narrative of tournaments too much. I like this idea that poker needs to have meaning. Yeah, that too. Like,
yeah.
I think I think being aware of why poker functions as a game is really, really important. And I think again, I always come back to the World Series of Poker. The reason everyone gets excited for the World Series of Poker is everyone wants to go on with a bracelet, and like I just use that as like the most mundane example that really just I think hammers the point home. That like
it's very iconic.
There's a reason people are drawn to this stuff. Like things need to have history. They need to have like like obviously you can say the same about literally anything. Obviously, so the start of the show. Like you take any sport, anything like this, it's all the same, really. I mean, you attach meaning to things because people want meaning to be attached to them.
Yeah, sure.
And I think tournaments do that in a very special, unique way. I think, in a sense, as opposed to like cash is like a lot more of the static, run of the mill. And don't get me wrong, cash is a very fun format of a very fun game that we all love. But yeah, it's a bit different. It's like comparing out oranges and clementines or something. I don't know. Like, I don't know. What kind of comparison? It's not really apples and oranges, really, per se, but it's something different of the similar ilk.
Yeah, I hear you. Because, part of why I wanted to ask that question was actually going back to when we were speaking about GTO Wizard evolving. And I think historically, as the tools got better, the games got harder. I know we don't really predict the future. Well, at least I know Jordan and I think that way. But I do wonder if it gets to a certain point where people will just start to branch out to other games, whether it's PLO or mixed games. If the games get so hard, because I mean, at the core, like I could just tell by talking to you, right? You get extremely enthusiastic about, finding new things to study in the game and whatnot. So that's kind of why I asked the question. If you ever feel you get tapped out at any point, you might just gravitate towards something else to just learn something new. Bit of an economic cost, though.
Yeah, that's it. The opportunity cost is there for sure.
Or opportunity cost, yeah.
What I would say is, I think I'd probably just not take enough of that first step. I think if I made that initial leap to do it, then I might actually find something there. But I don't think, maybe I just haven't made that actual step. Like, I haven't actually bought Vision, for PLO or something, and actually just started looking at it. Like, it's one thing saying you're going to do it, but you actually have to go and make those initial steps, and you've already come this far in no limit tournaments, right? So it's like you're kind of like you're kind of resting within your little comfort zone to an extent, and maybe that's something I could address for sure. I think you're potentially onto something that's, and maybe as I get a bit older, it'd be something that I look to do. Yeah. I will say I think you've made a very you've brought up a very good point in terms of like, I think PLO obviously has had a rise in popularity. They can run 100k PLO this time in the World Series, I think, this year, right? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
They've had record numbers. I think it was at 25k PLO had more than 25k no limit last year at Vegas. It was crazy.
Really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
But also, obviously, in cash games, they're trying to innovate. Obviously, you've had the Squid Game, stand-up game, whatever you call it, come in, and like all lots of different variants of ridiculous things, just to try and spice things up, and just trying to change
short deck.
Norm, basically.
Yeah. I just think it's interesting because. Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
I can see that happening in tournaments. It's just a bit harder to innovate in that respect. Like, obviously, Joker's Val was a thing a while ago, but the Joker's just too OP, and then like Win the Button is just like. I mean, these formats are fun occasionally, but they just don't really work in the tournament format. It's a lot harder to innovate within the tournament sphere, other than maybe like increasing antes. Obviously, PKO is a fantastic one. PKO is like my favorite format of poker, really.
Oh yeah.
I think it's just because it's more pure. Like, you just have to play more hands all the time, and like there is a risk premium element, especially in the bigger fields. But like you're forced to play hands. Like, if you're gonna make money in this format, you have to play hands. Which I really like. I do, and I think that was the biggest innovation in tournament poker that's really gone for the better. But it's ultimately, how far can you push it, right? Like, and like you say, maybe at some point I will branch out. Who knows? Not currently, I would say, but yeah.
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody about it the other day, where because again, I'm not going to predict that. I don't think no limit hold'em tournaments will ever die, for what it's worth. I think there's always going to be, you guys were talking about the comfort buy-in level. Maybe that just shrinks over time, where it's, instead of 200 to 1Ks, it's 200 to 500s maybe. But I do find the idea of, if it was headed into that direction and you were already, maybe a mixed games or a PLO player, and you were just already sharp, and you had all these guys just coming into your pool, it's just the edge you'd have would be insane. I was just interesting. I was talking to somebody about it the other day.
Yeah, just on the point of tournament innovation too, I think one that I do lament about a little bit is mystery bounties. They were clear. I think in my mind they were clearly introduced as a live answer to the progressive knockout format. Because like, obviously live they were only running super knockouts, where like they could, the bounties are worth absolutely heaps at the start and then worth absolutely zilch later on. And obviously that still happens in PKO in bigger fields and a lot of the time. Don't get me wrong, but like, at least in the PKO there's a progressive element to it, as we say. But like, the problem with mystery bounties is that like the game just kind of like as soon as the game just broken when they come involved. Like it's just so ridiculous how they play. You know, I just it irks me a little bit. The problem is operators now they've been running them and have a sample size know how good it is for their bottom line. So, so they've carried on running them and have extended them into online. We're like, did we even need PKO like mystery bounties online? I've never really thought we did personally, but that's just my little thing. But
yeah, I mean, I think that the operators want the edge on the from the pro side to be as low as possible,
absolutely.
right? Yeah, so like
and the mysteries are fantastic.
Mysteries pretty much solve that problem, right? So you just end up having to degen it off.
Because PKO edges are pretty. When you play PKO edges well and actually it looks at how wide you have to VPIP in PKOs correctly, edges are pretty actually big in PKOs.
Yeah, like, edges are. Sure. Yeah, especially with guys that, like, you know, if you take a sample of people that know how to play them, like you can.
Yeah, I've seen some graphs of the best. It's crazy. Like some of the edges they've had, and even pretty tougher field PKOs. So.
Yeah, and I've spoken with some guys that are like because the PKO format's grown so widely. Like there are guys that are starting to specialize in PKO only, so like they don't load non PKOs, and those guys like they have like very good like results, and like some of the guys that I know that have decided to do that, and EVs like they're like, and obviously the EV is like, you know, complicated, but it's just like they're clearly doing very 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 well. And but yeah, I don't know that the mystery bounty format works to the like it can ever be to the benefit of the pro player community, for example.
I mean, the only major edge you have in a mystery bounty is just being able to adequately gamble at the point of their introduction.
Yeah, just
I'll be able to just recognize. Or like when the big bounties stayed in for a while, still bloody gamble with 3 tables left, 2 tables left. Or the complete opposite, when the big bounties have gone, realize you can't gamble, but everyone else is gambling around you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's those are the edges you can find. But we're talking. You're playing usually. If you find an edge on that other side, it's an edge for half of the prize pool. It's not an edge for the entire prize pool. So for sure. And you paid a full buy-in to have an edge for half the prize pool. So you've got to make sure that you capture the big bounties. Long example to make
100%.
So. Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up, because I know you messaged me about it privately, about how you own 2 properties now. How important is it for poker players to kind of diversify their wealth and not just have it all be in poker?
Well, it's actually really funny. So at the same time, I was talking about like I was having this WhatsApp conversation after grinding last night. I got asked why I thought that like the top player in the world is doing EV wise per year in tournament poker. I was struggling to put the number past 2 million. Like, I mean, how much there's a bit like, I mean, I was thinking maybe someone like Adrian. You know, like he's had the best results the past few years, but he's been at the top for a decade, and he's like from playing a lot of hands against him online, and obviously he does online and live and spades, ultimate professional. Obviously, the mind inside the mind of a pro he did for Winamax is some of the best YouTube content for anyone out there. By the way, I watched that a couple of weeks ago, and I'm not a shell for anything.
No, that's cool.
It's like it's like a 12 episode series where he goes over every hand in like a 6-day run, where he included folding kings when some guy had aces and a 3-bet pot, just absurd stuff.
Shit, that is cool.
But at the same time, just playing some really like good sizings, theoretically sound, and just playing as the aggressor super well too. So like just blending the best of both worlds and that kind of unique tournament, you know. That's what made it such good content for like an avid kind of studier of the game and like someone that kind of wants to get better. So I would implore people to go and watch that. I was thinking, I mean, if you outlay like 15 million in buy-ins as top player in the world, you're going to be very focused at the super high rollers. You might be making high single digits, 10% ROI across a blanket of like where you're putting your money. Maybe you get to 1.5 mil or something. Sure. So I think the problem is with tournament poker is that you've got to be driven by the competition. It's a very good platform to go from no money to a pretty good amount of money, I think. But scaling beyond that gets a bit difficult, I think. I think cash game doesn't really like.
Go ahead. Don't keep going. It's actually it's literally a quote from Doug Polk, I think, where he says the exact same. He literally said it the exact same way.
Like, especially if you're in the cash game sphere and you get into the live private cash game sphere, that's definitely a bit more scalable. But ultimately, like if you wanted to approach it from a directional point of building wealth, then you're gonna have to do other things, like for sure. Like, I mean, if you want to compete in tournament poker, then that's fine. Like, and I still do that like 90% of my hours. You know, like that's fine. But there are a few more hours going in different directions, and I think that will especially as you get older and like, you know, you never know what the game's going to be. Like you say, don't want to predict the future, and maybe I'll do another form of poker, or I'll do some other game at some point. Who knows? But like having some, you know, other avenues in which you can explore for, you know, setting yourself up, I suppose, is you know, seems like a net positive all around. So
What made you land on property? Like, did you
it's
explore,
just one of the few things. Sorry,
one of
go
the few
ahead.
things? Yeah. No, I was gonna say if you explored other stuff like just getting into markets or
Yeah,
just
I've
the
been in the
simplest.
markets. I'm in the markets. I've been
Yeah.
dabbling in crypto, basically all sorts. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
kind of sticking, you know, bits of, you know, allocating bits of my portfolio and different things, and getting a little bit, you know, interested in them, and doing research in various different areas outside of poker, which can be a bit refreshing too sometimes. Especially if you had a very dull session and then your friends are just talking about the markets in the chat. You know, it's nice to just go and, go and read and meme about that stuff for a while. Like it can be nice, you know. And then, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it feels like also you're kind of, obviously when you're in such a niche bubble in poker, what you do is so unique that like it's hard to like, sometimes you just forget that the outside world's even going on around you sometimes. But then when you actually get into these more kind of, you know, not centralized, but like these more established kind of income generation models, like you start to like get, you know, you start to come one with the world again. You start to become a citizen again, rather than just a guy that habitually just sits in casino. Like they go to Las Vegas for 7 weeks to sit in a casino, you know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and that's like their work, you know. So yeah, that's kind of like how I've always viewed it. And yeah,
Yeah.
scalability is a big one as well.
Yeah, I
Like,
feel like a lot of people, like I said, Doug Polk, I think phrased it almost in the exact same way. I don't know if you'd heard him say that because you literally phrased
no,
it.
no, I haven't. No, no,
Okay,
I
because he
haven't. No,
literally
no.
phrased it, I think, almost verbatim the way that you said it, where it's
That's scary.
he said it was a really good vehicle for going from like zero to like a good amount of money, like zero to like a million, zero to like 1.5 million,
Sure.
maybe 0.2 million, whatever, and then going beyond those numbers starts to get you start to need to be able to do other things. It starts to because to move the bankroll, essentially, you have to be playing like really high stakes, and the games just get really competitive, right? And so it's just the way it is.
And that circles back to what we talked about earlier as well, to an extent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
That becomes involved as well. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. Yeah. No, that's kind of how that's my viewpoint, and that's why I've been getting more involved in that kind of thing. And it's been a nice break of pace. It's largely just been this calendar year that I've really pushed for that, because I've kind of started to have enough money that's kind of just losing to inflation, where I like, I need to do something with this really. And
sure.
you know, the rates of money, how fucking the market's crazy, how crazy like money has moved as a vehicle in like, the past 8 years. I can't just let it sit there, you know,
Yeah,
and just
sure.
like kind of play poker into my latter years and just pretend that nothing else is going on. And I thought it'd be a bit of a sensible thing to do.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree with you.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it, boys. I think we're good. You have anything
Nice.
else you want to ask Andy, Jordan?
No, I'm good, man. I think that's a great spot to end it.
Yeah, awesome. Andy, thank you so much for your time. It's a great episode, great conversation. Definitely probably one of the more higher poker strategy type conversations we've had. So I appreciate you jumping on with us.
Always a pleasure. Really, really enjoyed this. Very engaging, and like wouldn't have expected anything less. It was a great.
Thank you, Andy.
Awesome.
Appreciate you, brother. Thank you, man.
Guys.
Talk
All
soon.
right.
Good
Bye.
one.
Take care, gentlemen.